We're going to begin history today with the American's Creed, but we're going to do something just a little bit different. Instead of looking at your book the whole time, when you stand, I would like you to put your finger in your book, try to mark your space, and let's see how well we can do without looking at it. Class, stand. Ready? Begin.
The American's Creed. I believe in the United States of America as a government of the people, by the people, for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent of the governed, a democracy and a republic, a sovereign nation of many sovereign states, a perfect union, one and inseparable, established upon those principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity, for which American patriots sacrificed their lives and fortunes. I therefore believe it is my duty to my country to love it, to support its Constitution, to obey its laws, to respect its flag, and to defend it against all enemies. The American's Creed.
Woo, that was excellent. You may have a seat. Students watching, I hope that was as easy for you as it seemed for these students in the classroom. Well, in our last lesson, we took our first history test. And fourth grade is hard, and it might have been a hard test for you. Did very well, though. One thing I want to point out is when we learn names of people, when we learn those maps, did you see how on the test you had to remember those names of the people and you had to remember those names on the map? So you really want to be paying attention and putting it away in your mind as we learn it in class. That way when our next test comes, it'll be much easier for you. We have a new map to learn today. I'm excited. I love maps. Let's look up here at our map. This map has several rivers that we're already familiar with. We have some lakes we're going to learn about and also some of the very first settlements. Right now, you're just going to repeat after me. Missouri River.
Missouri River.
Mississippi River.
Mississippi River.
Ohio River.
Ohio River.
Ohio River.
Ohio River.
Do you see how the Missouri River looks very small? It's because it's cut off on the map. We don't go any further than that, but it is a very long, long river. Missouri River.
Missouri River.
Mississippi River.
Mississippi River.
Ohio River.
Ohio River.
Now we have some lakes. These lakes all together are called the Great Lakes. Now the reason they're called the Great Lakes, I believe, is because these lakes are great. Now, you say, what do you mean, Miss Sandoval? They are huge, huge lakes. Now, some of our students watching might live very close to the Great Lakes. These Great Lakes are so huge that it's not just like you can row your little boat across. They're so far across you can almost not see to the other side. It's like going to the beach. I know a girl who lives in Michigan. She lives right near Lake Michigan. She says when she gets there, it's like going to the beach for them. They go to Lake Michigan and they play there and they get in the water because these lakes are so huge. There are 5 Great Lakes. The first one is Lake Superior. Say Lake Superior.
Lake Superior.
Lake Michigan.
Lake Michigan.
Lake Huron.
Lake Huron.
Lake Huron.
Lake Huron.
Lake Erie.
Lake Erie.
Lake Ontario.
Lake Ontario.
We're going to say it one more time. Lake Superior.
Lake Superior.
Lake Michigan.
Lake Michigan.
Lake Huron.
Lake Huron.
Lake Erie.
Lake Erie.
Lake Ontario.
Lake Ontario.
Now we have a way to remember this, okay? So just watch. The first one starts with an S, Lake Superior. The second lake starts with an M, Lake Michigan. The third one is an H, Lake Huron. The next one is an E for Lake Erie. And the last one is an O for Lake Ontario. So we have a funny sentence that will help us remember it. It's silly monkeys help everyone. Say that with me.
Silly monkeys help everyone.
So this is how we're going to say it. Just listen, you're not speaking right now. We'll say Great Lakes, silly monkeys help everyone. Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario. Let's try it together. Ready?
Great Lakes, silly monkeys help everyone.
Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario. Excellent. That's hard to do the first time. We have a couple settlements to learn. Repeat after me. Quebec.
Quebec.
Plymouth.
Plymouth.
Jamestown.
Jamestown.
Roanoke.
Roanoke.
St. Augustine.
St. Augustine.
Quebec.
Quebec.
Plymouth.
Plymouth.
Jamestown.
Jamestown.
Roanoke.
Roanoke.
St. Augustine.
St. Augustine.
All right, let's cover all of it. Let's see how well you do. Repeat after me. Missouri River.
Missouri River.
Mississippi River.
Mississippi River.
Ohio River.
Ohio River.
Now we say these all together. Ready?
Great Lakes, silly monkeys help everyone.
Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario. Quebec,
Quebec.
Plymouth,
Plymouth.
Jamestown,
Jamestown.
Roanoke,
Roanoke.
St. Augustine.
St. Augustine.
Very good. I see you're paying good attention to this map. We're going into a new chapter today, and I'm excited about it. In this beginning part of the chapter, we are going to talk about the Native American people who lived in the United States. Now, think about this for a minute, okay? Maybe you need to close your eyes to picture it. Imagine that you live in the United States, but there's nobody really here. There were no houses yet. There were no cars. There were not even horses here yet. So how did they live? How did they get around? Well, these Native American people were very smart people that lived in the United States. And they had to think of different ways to make houses, to get their food, to kill the animals to get their food, to get their clothes. They didn't have cloth yet, so they had to think of different ways to get it. The first thing we're going to talk about today are teepees. Now, when we think of Indian homes, the Native Americans, we know they were called Indians because Christopher Columbus came to America and called them Indians, but they were not from India. And these Indians or Native Americans, we always think of as living in teepees. Teepees are houses built with poles, and they get buffalo hides and they stretch them around the poles, and those are teepees. But not all Indians lived in teepees. Let's think about this. If those Indians lived in New England, where Miss Anspaugh's family lived, which is up here, where Rhode Island and Connecticut, Massachusetts are, there are no buffalo in New England. Are there students watching that live in New England? There are no buffalo in New England. So are they going to be able to make buffalo skins around teepees? No, they're not. So they have to make another way for a house. Some Indians lived in wigwams. Some Indians lived in things called hogans. Some Indians got poles and they put them up and they put grass and mud around them. We're going to look at different pictures in a minute. Some Indians even made houses out of the rock. They would carve their houses into the rock. So not all Indians lived in teepees, but several of them did. How did the Indians get around? They didn't have horses. Many Indians used the water to get around. They would make canoes. They would cut down trees, and they would hollow out the middle of that tree, and they would have a canoe, and they would go down rivers. Maybe they even went down the Mississippi River or the Ohio River. But some Indians didn't make canoes out of just the wood and the logs. They made something called bull boats. Say bull boats.
Bull boats.
Bull boats is when they get a frame, maybe some wood, and they would take hides of animals and stretch it around into a round shape, and they would go down the river that way. How many of you think you would like to travel in a bull boat? I think it would be pretty neat. You say, what did the Indian children do? Well, many Indian children, they learned archery. They learned with bows and arrows because this is before they had guns. So they would learn to shoot things, and they were very good at shooting and being on target. They would also play games like we like to play. One game they played was a game called Snow Snake. Now, living here in Florida, we might not understand this game, but Miss Anspaugh's family lives in Rhode Island. And in the wintertime, the snow builds up, and it gets really high. Last winter, it was one of the worst winters they had had in a long time. And when I walked outside of my house in Rhode Island, the snow, no joke, was up to my knees. It was so high. Well, a game the Indian children would play is a game called Snow Snake, and they would move that snow off to the side and make a little spot, maybe like where you would go sledding, and they would take sticks, and they would form them to look like snakes, and they would take that fake snake, and they would slide it down the snow and see how far it would go. And when it stopped, they would stand it up. And then the next little Native American child, Indian child, they would get their snow snake and they would shoot it down the snow and see how far it would go. And they would play games like that, just like we like playing today. They played normal games. But think about the hard work that those Native American people had to do. Before horses, before cloth, they had to do a lot of hard work, but they also knew how to have fun and enjoy it. Let's read about that in our books on page 24. If my readers will begin making their way up here. On page 24, we see lots of different pretty homes of the Native American people. Let's look at some of them. The first one says the Wichita Indian Lodges. Do you see those? Those are not made out of animal skin. They're made out of grass and sticks. Looks like hay. My favorite are the Indian cliff dwellings. Do you see how that looks like a high up mountain and they carved into that rock? That must have taken a lot of work. Look over at the next one. I think this one's the funny one. A lodge made of earth and wood. Do you see how they got that hill of dirt and they made their house in that hill? Can you imagine if you walked up the wrong side of that house and you didn't know it was a house? Doop, 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 doop. Oh, hello, I'm sorry to be walking on your house. Very kind of funny, huh? And then the bottom one is a Pueblo dwelling. That's made out of clay and dirt, and it looks very much like houses that we see, apartments. If you look on page 25, you see a Sioux teepee. Those are the teepees made out of buffalo hides and the sticks. And then a hogan made out of logs and dirt and grass. Let's read about this. Riley, come on up. The first Americans.
The first Americans. The differences in American Indians. When Columbus discovered America, he mistakenly called the people who lived there Indians because he thought he was near India. Even today, descendants of the Native Americans are called Indians. The original Americans had never called themselves Indians before Columbus came. Although each tribe had a name for its own group, as far as we know, no tribe had a name for all the Native Americans combined. Each tribe thought of itself as a separate nation and was different from the others in many ways.
Thank you. Let's think about that. These Indians, they didn't live all together. Some lived out west in Arizona. Some lived down south in Georgia. Some lived up north in New England. They lived all over. So they did things differently. They didn't all do them the same exact way. They all lived differently according to their surroundings. Continue reading for me, Peniel.
Native American homes. Many people today have the mistaken idea that all Native Americans lived in teepees, tents made by stretching animal skins over poles. Actually, few Indians lived in teepees. Pictured are the homes of six different groups of the Indians, and there were many more. Transportation. How did the Indians travel? Before European explorers came, Native Americans had no horses or oxen, so they had no need for wagons. For most tribes, water was the best way to travel. Therefore, American Indians built many different kinds of boats. Some traveled in birch bark canoes or canoes were dug out of a tree trunk. Others made wool boats by stretching buffalo skins over a round frame.
Thank you, Nathan. Indian games.
Indian games. Native Americans of all ages love games. Indian children played much the same as children do today. Little girls often played with dolls made from corn husk and other dried plants. Boys were given toy bows and arrows with blunt points. With these, they could pretend to be mighty hunters bringing home deer or buffalo for their family's meat.
Thank you. Paige.
Of course, there were always games of skills such as fishing, swimming, target practice, and canoe and foot races. These games provided the children with fun and gave them practice for the day when they would need these skills. But children were not the only ones who enjoyed the games. Both men and women enjoyed sports.
Thank you. Kush.
Have you ever played the game which hand is it in which you tightly close both fists? Inside one fist is an object. The other player then tries to guess which hand holds the object. Nearly all Indians like to play this game in some form. The most popular way was the moccasins. An object was placed inside each of several moccasins. Moccasins. But only one object was marked. Each Indian tried to guess which moccasin contained the marked object.
Emily.
For those Indians who lived in the north, there were winter sports. One popular winter game was snow snake. First, a track was made by dragging a log through the snow. Then long sticks were found and made smooth, and one end was carved to look like a snake head. Each player would try to slide his snow snake farther than anyone else. When one snow snake stopped, it will
stuck upright.
It will stuck upright in the snow to mark the player's place. Then the next person would try to send his snow snake even farther.
Thank you. Let's think about this. The Indians, they didn't have guns, they didn't have horses, but then the white men from England are going to come over. And we're going to think about how is their way of life going to change as they come over. Faith, continue reading for us.
The Indians' way of life changes. Before Europeans began exploring America, many Native American tribes took care of all their own needs. Because many Indians did not trade with other tribes, European explorers often thought these tribes were very poor. Indians were isolated from the gospel and had never seen the scriptures. Each tribe made its own religion. Some worshipped idols, some worshipped the sun and moon. When white men began to explore the settlement America, the Indians' way of life slowly changed.
Gabrielle?
They began to trade furs and food for strong iron pots and shining copper kettles. Making pottery and baskets was no longer necessary for the some Indians. They began buying cloth to make clothes instead of using animal skins. Colorful beads replaced the bones and shells used to make Indian jewelry. Guns and knives began to replace arrows.
Jay?
As white men built more homes and killed more game animals, there was less meat for Indians to eat. Some Indians who had been hunters became farmers in order to have enough food to eat. With the white men came horses, oxen, and cattle. The horse especially changed the Indians' way of living. Even the Indians' ways of building homes changed. In the 1800s, some Native Americans built log cabins.
Thank you. Pull out a pencil and let's look at our comprehension check 3A. Number 1, who gave the Indians their name? Parker.
Christopher Columbus.
Woo, way to go. Make sure you're writing it down. Number 2, why did he call them Indians? Students watching? Kenton?
Because he thought he was in India.
Yes. Number 3, Which Indian dwelling was made by stretching animal skins over poles? Nathan?
Teepees.
That is correct. If you look down at the bottom of those pages 26 and 27, those are the words you really want to be focused on, those big, bold words. Go and close books. What term did Columbus call the Native Americans and why? Faith? He thought he was somewhere, so he called them,
Indian.
and that is why, because he thought he was in.
Indian.
Very good. What animal changed the Indians' way of life? Emily?
Horse.
Good. What was a popular winter game of the Indians, Riley?
Snow snake.
Good. What was a mode of transportation that Indians stretched buffalo skins over a round frame? Gage?
Bull.
Good. And what are tents made by stretching animal skins over poles? Kenton?
Teepees.
That is correct. Students watching, if you have time, go ahead and reread those pages that we read for history today.